Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. This is going to be a slightly different episode because it's a kind of a direct reaction. In fact, it's a direct response to another YouTuber. She hasn't referred to me, so I'm not going to refer to her, but I think a lot of people would know who I'm talking about. One of the reasons I don't want to refer to her too specifically is it would seem like I'm taking some kind of pot shot, or that I want to undermine or insult or whatever, and that's not the point. The point is simply to have a conversation, have a discussion. You guys are in on it as well, so you guys can sort of sit on the sidelines and say, I agree or I disagree, whatever. I hope you guys can bear in mind it's a intelligent discussion, and in that sense I appreciate it. I appreciate that someone's got a different opinion and some of it is educated. I think she knows psychology fairly well, but that they say sometimes a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, and I don't mean that to say that she's not intelligent, just that her knowledge of true crime, I think, is a little bit different. It's different when you dealing with true crime to dealing with abuse in ordinary society, in civil society, in domestic situations. True crime is where someone has been murdered, and to conflate that with the sort of ordinary domestic traits, that is what I think is a little bit dangerous. Nevertheless, I hope people listening can see this as not sort of antagonistic. It's not sort of some kind of wrestling match. It is simply trying to respond, and it's up to the listener to decide which argument makes the most sense and what is meaningful to you. And so hopefully it will be a meaningful discourse, right? Now, what's also for me quite interesting is we talking a lot about narcissism, and one thing that I think separates me from not only this particular YouTuber but all the others is I find it a bit uncomfortable, awkward, and even a little bit sort of vulgar, this whole idea of sitting in front of a camera, and now you're not taking a selfie, but you actually sort of staring at yourself while talking and hearing yourself speak and so on. I find it difficult enough to try and tickle the boxes and touch on all the things that I want to do without trying to sort of put up a certain face to the camera and to sort of look into a camera and all that kind of thing. I just find it's difficult to think and to to access the detail of a case like this when you sort of on camera. It's certainly possible to do, and it's easier to do for me in a face-to-face conversation, but I don't like that. I don't like that sort of situation where you are you are sort of on camera like that. And if we're going to talk about narcissism, when you look at a lot of YouTubers' channels and you look at their videos, you just see video after video after video is their faces, right, again and again and again and again. And that's certainly their choice, and one could even argue that by doing that you certainly have better rapport with your viewers. My videos are more like podcasts, and I also like to anchor what I'm saying. I like to sort of show you that what I'm saying is based on evidence. It's anchored on real things. What I notice with a lot of these YouTubers who sort of present their own faces and their own expressions, there's sort of a very sort of glossing over of everything. They're not specific really about everything. Everyone knows what they're talking about. They'll refer to the video of on the porch, and they'll refer to when he was interrogated, but it's not really drilling into any kind of detail. And that is, I think, the reason why we have a difference of opinion, because you can be very sort of opinionated when you don't have that much knowledge of the case, right? Now, again, I don't want to, I don't want any nastiness or ugliness to be part of the what I call the discourse, the discussion. So, in order to avoid sort of making slights and all that kind of thing, let me just confirm again that I appreciate the opportunity to sort of have a intelligent discussion on something that's quite important. I just want to be honest as well and just say my emotional response to this particular YouTuber and her attitude on the Chris Watts case, and I'm just being completely forthright. The one emotion is anger, and the other emotion is alarm, right? The anger is sort of based on almost sort of a sense of indignation, where you feel a really strong sense of connectedness to the material. Bear in mind, I've written 10 books and hundreds of blogs, and I don't know how much reading she has done, but I can sort of intuit from that she must think, she must have an impression that my work is, the books that I've written have no value, the blogs that I've written have no value, and that I'm just simply a amateur kind of thing. And let me just say that I don't have the same view of her. I think she knows about abuse, and I think that she knows about psychology, and I think she is a credit to her audience, and I think she's got 20,000 viewers, and I think they are getting a lot out of that. But that's also where the alarm comes from. So I'm a little bit angry that my efforts have been undermined. Maybe not like I'm looking at you and I just don't really respect your work. I'm not saying it's personal, but I'm just saying indirectly it is undermining my efforts, and it invalidates the work that I'm doing. Again, not necessarily directly, but I'm just saying that's why there is anger there. I sort of look at someone else who's very popular and people agree with her, and yet I'm sort of looking at it and saying, but it's just not accurate, it's just not right. The arguments are facile and they're sort of superficial, right? And that aggravates me. It's sort of like, wow, you've just gone slightly off track here, and now look where you've ended up. And from that anger is also then alarm, and the alarm comes from where this idea, and I'm going to address it more specifically when we get to the end of this episode, and that's to do with you the viewer, you the listener, you the person who is getting your counseling from this particular person. Now, I want to be quite explicit on this point, because I think I'm quite misunderstood on this. My position with true crime isn't that I'm some kind of, I don't particularly like true crime. What I do like about it is that it helps us understand ourselves, or it can. But this is a good example. This particular case and this particular YouTube is an example of how it can also be misunderstood and misinterpreted, and it can be misleading and can be misguided, and that brings into sharp focus this whole idea of my perception is that a lot of people who are interested in true crime are people who won't acknowledge it, but they see themselves as victims, and so through true crime they are voyeurs in their own victimhood, and that's why you will get incredible hysteria in terms of in true crime. For example, there's a huge population who are cheerleaders for Stephen Avery, even though he's accused of murdering a woman, and even though he's accused of raping a woman and burning her body. These cheerleaders believe that he's a victim, and that poor Stephen Avery, and they want to sort of rush to his defense. There are many others as well, like Damien Eccles and Amanda Knox, where people just completely see their own oddball existence through these characters, and then they turn them kind of into celebrities. And what that really is people who are victims themselves, sort of, I don't know, identifying with the plight of these others, and really rallying behind them. And that's where true crime gets really dangerous and really horrible, and where having a sense of humor about it starts to wear a little thin, and where one needs to actually get quite serious and say, well, wow, do we have the ability to see reality? Do we have the ability to understand other people? Do we have the ability to actually look into a crime and know what the F happened, right? And when we don't, we run the risk of looking, as I've been saying all along, you run the risk of looking into these cases, and all you're really doing is you're projecting your own crap onto these cases. You're projecting your own garbage and your own mirrors and your own, tinted lenses all over these particular cases. And it's very obvious that this particular YouTuber comes from a psychology of abuse. I don't know whether she's had relationships that have been abusive, but her clients have been abusive. Her entire sort of job and her kind of worldview is within this context of abuse, and so that then gets foisted onto this case wholesale. And I have a problem with that, because you are now dragging your clients into that as well, aren't you? I mean, aren't you taking your people that trust you and that you are giving guidance to, you're taking them into this case and saying, this is an example of a narcissist, and these are narcissist tendencies, and be aware of narcissism, blah, 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 blah. And that's fine if it's true. It's fine if the guidance you're giving is accurate, but what if it's not? And that's really where I'm coming from, is I'm saying narcissism is not an accurate way to understand the Chris Watts case. I've already done a video on that. It's not the full story. I am going to do another video which is about the link between narcissism and millennials, and the Watts family were millennials. And so narcissism certainly is a it is a relevant psychology, but it's relevant in the psychology of the world today. That's how it's relevant. It's relevant that we are a narcissistic society. It's not relevant in that Chris Watts is a narcissist. And I've said this before, if you want to have a argument about narcissism in the Chris Watts case, then talk about the social media aspect, talk about the multi-level marketing, and talk about Shanann Watts' narcissism. And why this is anathema to this particular YouTuber is and this is a little bit distasteful, I'm afraid to say, but it seems like if you're a woman, then you can only be abused by a man, and there's no such thing as there doesn't seem to be such a thing as a man being abused. There doesn't seem to be such a thing as a woman who's a narcissist. It's all from the perspective of a victim, and all victims are women, right? Well, I've got news for you. Even though it's a rarity, in high-profile true crimes, you do get women who kill women, and you also get women who kill men. And an example is Jodi Arias. And that's where you see how not all monsters are men, and not all victims are women. Some of them are men as well. But this is still being just very glossing over of the subject. So what I want to do now is I want to get to the actual debunking of the myths that this particular YouTuber touched on, and I want to counter them. I've kind of made a couple of notes, so I'm going to counter them according to them, but it's, to be honest, it was just really scribbling down a few things. I didn't study it. I didn't even listen to the whole thing. I probably listened to, I think, maybe 2/3 of it, but there just was a section which was just sort of something that I just skipped through. So it's not absolutely touching on everything, but it's hopefully touching on enough. So let's just start with the first thing that she mentioned, and she was saying something about the distancing thing, that and then that narcissists, they do actually have emotions. This was quite a strange way of dealing with it. I don't think this particular YouTuber seems to know much about the backstory to the Chris Watts case, in terms of, you know, what was going on during the 5 or 6 weeks when Shanann was in North Carolina. You know, does she know that, you know, the phone data review? Does she sort of know it off by heart? Does she sort of know just the ebb and flow of the closeness between Watts and his wife while he was having the affair, and then how he was trying to, you know, I'm just not sure. She may know the basics of it and the broad strokes, but do you know the sort of the detail? Because there clearly was distancing going on, and in order to distance yourself, it means you have emotions. You've got an emotional attachment to someone, and you need to prepare yourself emotionally to not be attached, right? And her response to this seems to be that, well, actually, narcissists do have emotions, and, you know, she's sort of admitting that. Yeah, well, of course. I mean, he was emotional enough to be in an affair, and he was emotional enough to be in love with somebody else, and that person was pursuing him and very much in love with him. She wasn't experiencing narcissism from him. So again, I just want to sort of just draw a little line to say there's one thing where you are helping someone, you know, as a YouTuber or as a person in your job, and you're helping them with your psychology, and you're counseling them. That is psychology, and that's fine. But to bring that into criminal psychology and then say, oh, no, it's exactly the same stuff, you know, narcissists are distancing themselves. It's a totally different situation where you are in a marriage where there's not murder, where there's not premeditation, all that kind of thing, where there's distancing. It's a totally different situation. The situation there where she refers to as devaluing, if you're going to call it distancing or devaluing, you're just arguing about semantics. But the devaluing is something that happens in a conventional relationship, a conventional romantic relationship where you might be married, or you might be a fling, or it might be a new relationship or an old relationship, whatever. But the devaluing that's part of that conversation. Distancing is a true crime phenomenon. It's well known. You know, you can see it happening in patterns in many cases. You see the distancing happening in the language that they use, and you also see the distancing happening in their behavior. And the Amanda Knox case is an incredible example of, you know, two people living together and then a distance coming between them for various, many often misunderstood reasons, and because of the PR around the Amanda Knox case, it's just not very understood. And in the Chris Watts case, you see the same kind of distancing. You see the same kind of attempt to try and get some perspective on his situation, and that perspective eventually becomes premeditation. And we know that I suspected that he started premeditating for weeks beforehand. But then you have people saying, No, they don't think it was a premeditated crime. They think it was spontaneous. They think it was that he just snapped. I don't know what this YouTuber's opinion is on that, but premeditation by definition means that there's distancing going on. There's this careful, considered approach. It's both emotional, it's also in the mind, where you need to put the person aside because you're going to dispose of them in a horrible way, right? Distancing is a artifact of true crime, and so to start conflating that with ordinary relationships and narcissism, it's just really, really dangerous. You need to keep criminal psychology separate from ordinary psychology, and I think it's very dangerous to sort of start associating them both ways, because criminal psychology is a different animal to ordinary psychology. It's similar where I say all murderers are liars, but not all liars are murderers. And so some psychology translates to criminal psychology, but it's like saying that all liars are murderers. If you're a psychologist, it's like saying all liars are murderers. No, some liars aren't. Most liars aren't murderers. A lot of liars never go on to commit crimes, but they are liars. So you can't conflate psychology with criminal psychology. It's a select area. And again, I must just say, how many criminals has this particular person studied? Isn't Chris Watts the very first one? And that's the difference between us. I've studied many of them. I've written books about them, which is a little bit different to just talking about them and studying one case. You get to know criminal psychology through studying not just a criminal, but taking him to trial, looking at what the psychometric assessments are of them and whether the judge accepts them. And I went through that whole procedure with the Chris Watts case, where he said he was suffering from an anxiety disorder, and he was then evaluated, and then the judge and argued that that's not he's going to have to stand trial. So it is important to understand criminal psychology, and if one has a degree in psychology, it doesn't mean one is qualified to prognosticate about criminal psychology as kind of an expert. And that's what I'm sort of saying, is that the abuse that you get in a relationship that doesn't lead to murder shouldn't be associated with the abuse that does lead to murder. They're two different animals. And you might be in a relationship where your partner isn't a very nice person. That's very different from associating them with murderers and monsters. And if you want to do that in your life, you want to demonize the people that you disagree with, if you want to elevate yourself to a victim and a saint, and the people you disagree with and who argue with you become like monsters and murderers, you can do that. It's just not going to be very good for your relationships, that's all. Another aspect that I noticed in this particular debunking argument, and it's something that I've noticed with quite a few people, and again, I think it's because if someone even like Dr. Phil or any psychologist, you tend to come to these cases by simply looking at the case, looking at the murder itself, looking at the incident, looking at what is the sort of low-hanging fruit. So you look at what did he say to the media, you look at what he said in the interrogation, and you basically just taking all the low-hanging fruit that everybody knows, and then that is your that's kind of the sum total of your assessment of the case. And even if you've read a lot, you've read sort of a lot of the media reports, right? Maybe you've read some of the discovery, and then you think, well, that is now, I've now done my due diligence, I now know what's going on here. But you don't. the whole nature of criminal psychology is that people hide who they really are, right? Far more so than ordinary people. Ordinary people also hide who they really are, right? Ordinary people hide behind avatars, and ordinary people pretend to be a little bit better than they actually are, and they put on a brave face, and they dress up for their YouTube live events and all that kind of thing. But with criminal psychology and criminal scenarios, that's far, far different. There's far more of an elaborate attempt to conceal. There's far more a situation of someone living a lie, right? There's far more a situation of hiding who you really are, where you committing a murder and you're killing someone. If you can hide someone's dead body away and not feel much remorse about it and put on a brave face, if you can do that, then you can also go through each day hiding who you really are. It's part of your daily thing, And in the Watts family, part of that thing of hiding who they really were in an everyday way that could lead to this disaster was the finances. That hiding who they really were wasn't just a little bit of hiding who they really were. The finances were in a devastating downward spiral, a horrible, destructive sort of maelstrom under that house. And yet they were pretending to be the perfect family, this picture postcard family. That kind of lying is how murders happen, because you've got to hide it away. I hope I'm being explicit on that particular point. So, just to be very, very clear, you cannot use the crime and the immediate aftermath of a crime to base some kind of psychological diagnosis on someone. So in other words, you can't look at Chris Watts being interviewed by the media and say he's a narcissist, which is exactly what Dr. Phil did. You can't look at just a little bit of information of him being interrogated where he's seeming nonchalant and say he's a narcissist, because what you are not seeing is all the premeditation planning that went into it. And so once he's committed the crime, he's got to continue with that premeditation, what I call post-meditation. And in that sort of ribbon of behavior, if I can put it that way, the ribbon of behavior from the premeditation through the crime to the aftermath, it's the same ribbon. And what I mean is, when the person commits the murder afterwards, they need to pretend that they don't know anything about it. They've committed the murder, they've seen the dead bodies, they've disposed of them. Now they must put on a face to people around them and pretend that it's just a normal day. And they must pretend that they haven't done anything, right? And when they're being interrogated, whether by the media or by the FBI or by family members, they must pretend that they've got no idea what is going on, right? And this is the part that is completely missed by this particular person and by other people. It is that nonchalance is an act. So you can't take the nonchalance and say, well, this person's got no emotion. The nonchalance is part of the act of trying to get away with this crime. And you see the exact same nonchalance with other criminals like Scott Peterson, Jodi Arias and so on, who are through their nonchalance trying to pretend that they are not guilty and that they are not culpable in any way. That's what the nonchalance is. And so it's very telling when Chris Watts was being interrogated and he's told for the first time by the interrogators, he said, "You have not shed one tear." And then he suddenly pretends to sniff, and then he says, "Well, it's because I'm hoping they're still alive." And there he gives away the fact that the nonchalance is a charade, which is a criminal psychology 101 thing. That charade to show, well, I don't know what you're talking about, and so I don't have any reason to be distressed, and I don't want to make you any more distressed. Otherwise, you will start thinking someone really has died. I don't want to make things worse for me. And part of that nonchalance is also a way of getting information. By being nonchalant, and I don't know what you're talking about, I don't know why you asking me questions, is another way of getting information. Now, you must tell me why you're worried, you must tell me what you know. All of that's part of criminal psychology. And so what's also interesting is this particular YouTuber refers to Patrick Frazee almost as, I'm not sure if I caught this part 100%, but she refers to them as being the same. You know, and I've heard some laughable comments where some people say Patrick Frazee is an incarnation of the devil. And you know, and so you're getting exactly the same thing, that Chris Watts is a monster and is the devil, but now Patrick Frazee as well, and so is the next criminal, and so is the next criminal. So which one is it? Which one is the absolute incarnation of evil? And then you can say, no, they're all evil. They're all evil people. And of course, once again, simply calling someone good or evil is relative, and it's also just through your own filter. It is not helpful at all. Anyone saying that a criminal is evil, it's just not telling us anything about them. It's simply your way of saying, I'm separated from this person, I'm good, they're evil. Yeah, we know that. That's kindergarten psychology. If you're caring about this case, you're interested in the case, you're interested in what's going on, then get beyond good and evil and start saying, what really happened with this guy? What really, why did this happen? And who is this guy? That's when you're going to get some insight into that and into yourself. And so I wish I could be more specific. I just can't really remember exactly what was said, but the YouTuber sort of mentioned, you can look at Chris Watts and see red flags in your own relationship, and you can look at Patrick Frazee and see red flags in your own relationship. No, you can't. You don't stand on this side of the equation, right? What I mean is, you don't stand here where we are and you say, he's a narcissist, he's evil, he's a monster, and I'm going to look at these red flags. That's not how you're going to heal your relationship and have a safer, better life. That is not how it's going to happen. Because it's a facile way of treating people and of labeling and of thin slicing in a way that's totally without substance. The way you want to do that is you want to first get to know this person on their terms, not on your terms, not through your label. You first get to know them, right? You get to know their identity, their backstory, their background. And if you say, well, it's unpleasant, I don't really want to get to know this person, I don't like them, then don't. But then agree that you've got a very shallow appreciation of the case. If you want a deep appreciation, then you spend a lot of time. You can read some books about it, you can go and do your own research, read a lot of articles, get to know their language, and try to discern a little bit what for them is true for them. And when you've gotten sort of a little bit comfortable in their shoes, then you can start relating the dynamics between that person and another person to the dynamics between you and your person in your family. In other words, you start from the inside of the case and then you draw it into your reality. Not you take your reality and you impose it on the case, and then you sort of put a mirror there and you look back at yourself and say, yes, this is how I'm seeing red flags. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if the way I'm saying that is too simplistic. But one thing that I think is missing from the this YouTuber's content, I haven't really studied a lot of it. I've sort of noticed some of the titles of them, but I would like to see her do an analysis on the narcissism of Shanann. I would like to see that. In my opinion, and I know it's unpopular, and I also know that it is controversial, and also know that it is not liked, it's not it's disapproved of, is that if you want to talk about narcissism, then Shanann was a much, much bigger narcissist in the Watts equation. And I would go so far as to say that she's a classic narcissist. She's the classic narcissist in the conventional terms of taking selfies and of being on social media constantly, and of this whole thing that I've been talking about, where you have your phone out there, or a camera, and you are talking into it constantly every single day. I've only come onto YouTube after about a year, and I don't really want to be here for very long. It's incredibly arduous anchoring the videos to content the way that I do, and I would much rather do it with books. And I just know that a lot of people watching YouTube don't read books, aren't interested in reading books, and that they want to kind of get what they want spoon-fed. And that's not really the audience that I want reading my books. I want intelligent, patient, considerate, people who want to be educated and informed, people who want to take the trouble to go and look, go and discover. And that's what my books provide. And YouTube just doesn't provide enough of a I don't know, it's not, I don't want to say opportunity, but it's, at the moment, it is just, it seems to be creating communities that are shallow. And I want to create more thoughtful communities and more, deeper, less superficial communities. And if you're going to make a criticism like I am, where you say, well, wasn't Shanann more of a narcissist? I know how the more superficial people will respond. How dare you blame the victim? But if you can try and keep your sort of tribes to yourself, and keep your reactions to yourself, and just try and be an intelligent person, just say, are we talking about narcissism? Yes, we are. And now we accusing Watts of being a narcissist, and I'm saying I don't think he is. And I'm saying, well, if you want to have the discussion, who can we have it with? And I'm saying it's with Shanann. Shanann is the victim in this case. Our sympathy lies with her. She's no longer with us, and that's terrible. But if you want to talk about narcissism, then you need to talk about it in an authentic way. And then you talk about her social media, her attitudes to getting what she wanted, and the whole Thrive business of have the life, have everything exactly the way you want, the man of your dreams, your fairy tale and all that kind of thing. And meanwhile, in that narcissistic approach, what's happening? Very dark things are happening. A nightmare is happening. And why are you not seeing it? Because you're not seeing through your own narcissism. And there seems to be some kind of horrible irony here, where we as a narcissistic society can't even see things for what they are, let alone ourselves. We can't see people for what they are, and so we can't see ourselves for what they are. We've got experts prognosticating, and they can't see things for what they are either. And that is a very, very, very terrifying prospect, is this thing of where we are all kind of muddling along, and no one actually knows what's going on. Nobody. We're all muddling along, and we've all got little fragments of the pizza of truth, but none of us have actually got the pizza. None of us have got the thing in the box. None of us have got the box, and the whole dimensions of it. True crime rocket science tries to do that, just in terms of true crime. Tries to say, well, we're going to be the first to get the dimensions of this. We're going to try and find the framework of what we're talking about. We're going to find the flavor and the fragments and the identity of these people. We're going to try and see how the ingredients are all put together, and what kind of pizza we're talking about. That's what true crime rocket science tries to do. And then you bring it back and you say, what does this tell us about society? So in terms of the Chris Watts case, what does this tell us about millennials? And what does it tell us about which way society is going, and how we should use social media in relationships, kind of thing? That would be a very useful, I think, conversation for this particular YouTuber to have, is the impact of social media on narcissism and on relationships and on affairs and on the authenticity of all that kind of thing. That would be a very helpful discussion, I think. How does social media make us shallower and more abusive and more inclined to dispose of one another, right? All of us. Not somebody else is a narcissist, but we all narcissists, and how is social media making all of us worse? And how can we, all of us, address this in our relationships so that we can be more in tune with one another and ourselves and have better relationships? In terms of Shanann, the whole nutgate thing is just a clear indicator of how she was willing to step all over other people to get what she wanted for her own situation. If that's not narcissism, I don't know what is. If that's not a toxic form of psychological abuse, I don't know what is. And Shanann had very many good traits. She was sensitive to her children. She, wanted things in a organized, and that kind of thing. But she also had bad traits. She wasn't good with. She was in control of the money, but it looks like she wasn't very responsible with it, which is why the credit cards were maxed out. Her going away for 6 weeks when she did, and her going away again, given what was going on, was that very well advised, And I know, again, how can you blame the victim? How can you? She's not here to defend herself. But in terms of narcissism, doesn't that correspond? Isn't that someone doing what they want to do, regardless of the other person in the equation? And isn't that why the other person in the equation, ... right? I also don't really like the way that this particular YouTuber uses words like discard and devalue, and conflating that with distancing. You may use those words with your clients, where maybe your particular person in a relationship felt discarded or devalued. It's just very different, and it's very dangerous using these terms, which are conventional psychology, in criminal psychology. If you start saying that someone discarded me, and that's the same as distancing, which leads to premeditated murder. If you're saying someone has devalued me, and that's the same as someone who's distancing on their way to premeditated murder, what argument are you trying to make here? You're trying to make the argument that your boyfriend is like Chris Watts. Do you want someone in their relationships to start saying, you know what, you're just like Chris Watts, who's a monster? Do you want them to demonize the loved ones in their lives? Because their loved ones aren't murderers, and probably most of them won't ever be. But you want them to associate them that way. A much better way to associate it is you go into the Watts situation first. And through that situation you get to know your own psychology and what you are doing. But if you're going to project into the Watts situation and then take your little red flags out of it and then stick those red flags into other people, that is a very dangerous and horrible thing to be doing, and it's not very helpful. It's not going to be good for your relationships. It might be good for you if you've broken up and now you can symbolically stick, almost like a witch sticking pins into a voodoo doll. Might feel very good from that perspective, but from the perspective of actually helping a situation, I really don't think it is. That's just my opinion. This YouTuber also refers to some kind of process where somebody idealizes you, then they devalue you, and then they discard you. That's very helpful. I'm sure that pattern is very well known, but you can't say that pattern is happening in this story. The Chris Watts story isn't what happened, I guess, the day before the murder and the day before. In other words, or even 6 weeks before, that he idealized his family. He idealized Kissinger, then he devalued his family, and then he discarded them. Broadly speaking, that's true, but even more broadly speaking, what about Shanann idealizing her husband on social media? What about her devaluing him in some of those Facebook posts. I don't know whether this YouTuber's watched them. Just sort of humiliating him on social media. What about her discarding him, going to North Carolina for 6 weeks? What about her just sort of being in her own little world, and Chris Watts must sort of run the errands and all that kind of thing? I'm not trying to blame Shanann, and I'm not trying to demonize her. I'm simply using Shanann as a counter to the thing of, I'm a woman, I'm a victim, I hate what Chris Watts did, Chris Watts is the enemy, narcissists are the enemy, let's blame all narcissists, let's get rid of narcissists or whatever. It's just a bit of simplistic black and white sticky taping. And the converse of it is, I'm a man, and I'm looking at this crime, and I think Shanann was a narcissist, blah, 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 blah. It's the same thing, just from a male perspective, and it's equally distasteful, it's equally not apt. But I can still make the argument. I can still definitely make the argument. And what I'm saying is, a woman making the argument against Chris Watts, or a man making the argument against Shanann, is still the same kind of, it's using narcissism in a way that's, I think, ultimately sexist, and it's not helpful in the psychology, and it's also, as I say, if you want to address narcissism, then address it in yourself and address it in society. It's a general theme. It's not specific to this case, and it's not specific to Chris Watts. It's not, so drop it, right? If we bring in the whole narcissism narrative into Chris Watts, and we talk about his marriage, and we say, oh, he idealized Shanann, he devalued her and discarded her. Well, think about the 8-year marriage that he had with Shanann. Did he love bomb her? Did he love bomb Shanann? I didn't get that impression. He pitched up at a movie underdressed. He cared for her when she was sick. That's not the kind of thing a narcissist would do. A narcissist if he wants to be the center of attention, why the heck would he be around someone who's sick and needs his care? I think somebody made the interesting but kind of ridiculous argument that because Shanann was sick, he could then be the center of attention. In other words, she's sick, so she really needs him, and so he then becomes the hero because of that. Not quite. If you make that argument, you need to understand what sick means, and sick in this sense is lupus, and lupus is an autoimmune disease. It's a disease that can literally take years off your life. It's a disease that can literally mean you're not going to have children. It's a disease that a lot of people don't understand. It's a disease that's sort of invisible, to the extent that a lot of people don't even believe that Shanann did have lupus. I believe that she did, and I believe that she really needed a very sensitive guy to understand her moods, and to understand her pain, and to understand her being difficult, and Chris Watts was that kind of guy. And up until as late as April, May, Shanann was singing his praises, saying that he's the best thing that's ever happened to her. Hold on. What's happened to the fact that he's been a narcissist his whole effing life? Hello, this is the question. The question is, he's been a narcissist his whole life. He's a covert narcissist. He was a narcissist through Shanann's whole marriage with him, and his whole marriage was an act. He was never kind to her. Nothing he ever did was out of genuineness. He was just a superficial jerk, right? So when Shanann was singing his praises, saying he's the best thing, was that also an act? Is it all an act? Is all of it just, we will make up whatever suits us? Us people looking into this crime, are we going to just make it up as we go along? We're just going to make up our own version of events, and we're going to convenience store, select what we want that suits our little story, and suits our little psychological story, and suits our psychological veneer, and that is part of our little filter, and we're going to just dismiss the other stuff. And so, do you know what you're actually doing? You're dehumanizing the people in the story. And you might not think there's anything wrong with that. You might not think there's anything wrong with dehumanizing a murderer. You might not think that there's anything wrong with dehumanizing a family annihilator. But you know what is wrong with that? When you dehumanize someone in that situation that you're not connected to, it's just so much easier to dehumanize someone in a situation you are connected to. That's exactly what you're being encouraged to do. You're encouraged to say, I'm struggling with this person, he doesn't love me, and now I'm going to dehumanize them. I'm going to call you a narcissist whenever you disagree with me. I'm going to call you a monster, an evil, whatever. And it's just not the way human being needs to operate. Do you know how we need to operate? It's an open question. Do you know how we need to operate in terms of one another? Do you know? It's not through the narcissism narrative. Do you know how we as human beings need to operate in terms of other human beings? And now what I'm saying to you through the helmet, or through the telescope, or whatever you want to call it, through the cockpit of true crime. Because when you study true crime in a really detailed way, and you look at dead bodies on autopsy tables, and when you follow the narrative through of them being killed and disemboweled and bleeding to death and buried, and their murderers lying about them, you know where you come out at the end of the day? When you follow their trials to completion, when you find that some of their trials they are found innocent, or not sentenced to death, or in some cases they're found guilty, and then people holler and cry out that they're actually innocent, and then they are found innocent, like Amanda Knox, like Damien Eccles, like what seems to be happening with Stephen Avery. What do we learn from all of this? What do we learn from criminal psychology? Not psychology. What do we learn from criminal psychology? You know what we learn? We learn about man's inhumanity to man. We don't get anything out of that by learning that in the way where we say, these are horrible people. We learn something where we say, wow, this could have happened to me. This person is me. Whether it could even be the perpetrator, I'm just like that person. Or the victim, I know someone who's just like that. So what do we learn? How do we learn to treat people? Well, by being human beings. And what is a human being? It is being humane, which is another word for kind, but it is showing humanity to our fellow man, right? Showing humanity to our fellow man, okay? It is finding the humanity in one another, and true crime is one way that we can do that. We don't find humanity in true crime by putting labels on criminals and by congratulating ourselves on how much better we are than they are, or by congratulating ourselves about how right we are, maybe how wrong somebody else is. We find humanity in that when we are sort of humble that what has happened to these people, these ordinary people just like you and me, can happen to ordinary people just like you and me. When we acknowledge that the mistakes that were made in these people's lives, serious mistakes, deadly mistakes, horrible mistakes, escalated, and those same mistakes can be made and are being made by you and me. We only get to that place when we are being human beings and being human beings to one another. When we recognize our own capacity to make mistakes, our own mortality and our own, just our own propensity to error. To say, yes, I also made a mistake, I can also make a mistake. I also have these qualities about myself that aren't great, right? And so if you want to bring these traits of narcissism into the Chris Watts case, don't stick to the just the day the crime was committed and what he said there and what he said afterwards. What about the whole relationship? What about his other relationships? What about his relationship with Kissinger? Did he also idealize, devalue her and discard her? He idealized her. Where did he devalue her? When he idealized her, did he devalue his wife to anybody else? Did he devalue his wife to Kissinger? Did he devalue his wife to the interrogators? He in the beginning, when Shanann was fielded as a scapegoat, Watts said there's no way, she loved those children, we both did, right? Didn't that have a ring of authenticity about it? The YouTube also refers to the final discard being the murder. And this really this really upsets me, because again you are using psychological terms. There are all sorts of terms that people who are in this whole sort of cloud, and they're words like trigger and toxic and discard and I don't really know what all those terms are, but it's a sort of terms people use when you're in a relationship and then someone is really trying to discard you or show how you have hurt them or something, that they're the victim, and then they say, well, you've been triggered by that thing that I said, and you're toxic towards me, or whatever it is, those sort of words. And all those words do is they label and they distance people within a relationship. So to use this word, the final discard was the murder. That's something that this YouTuber gave. Again, this is seeing the whole thing from the victim's perspective. It's almost like you are a victim in terms of you looking at the Chris Watts case, and you then seeing the way that Chris Watts killed Shanann is the way that my boyfriend or husband or whoever discarded me. No, it's not. Chris Watts murdered his family. Your boyfriend dumped you. There's a big difference. Chris Watts disposed of their bodies. He didn't discard their bodies, he disposed of their bodies. He buried them. There's a visceral difference between murder and disposing of bodies and burying bodies and someone discarding you on Facebook. There's a world of difference. Please don't conflate these two. Please don't contaminate true crime and criminal psychology with what's going on in your little life, in your relationship. Please don't do that. What I find, just frankly, what I find, I'm not going to use the word that I want to use, but what I just find, let's just use a neutral word like confusing. What I find confusing with this particular YouTuber is there's this argument that Chris Watts is a narcissist. And then when you challenge that argument, no. He's a covert narcissist. He's kind of like an invisible narcissist. And it reminds me of the sort of argument where, where Sarah Connor and these people talking about the Terminators in the Terminator movie. They're saying, they must now explain to a psychologist that they're not delusional. And the question is, okay, so explain to me what a Terminator is. Okay, well, he is sent from the future, and he's a machine that you can't kill, and they're all running after me. Nobody else. They're not trying to kill anyone else. They're running after me, And then the psychologist says, really? So what do they look like? No, they look like any ordinary person. In other words, there's no way to counterfeit what the delusion is, because it's both sort of under the surface invisible, and also on the surface it is just sort of conventional. So there's no way to dispute it. It reminds me of the same kind of straw man argument. So a covert narcissist, no. All these things you've said that sort of counter the fact that he's a narcissist. No. He's a covert narcissist. He's sort of a secret narcissist, and so that explains his narcissism. In other words, he's like a narcissist. He's not like any other narcissist, but he's like a very special kind. And again, this is a very, very narrow view. It's a very narrow view, saying, so is the special kind of narcissist, and so that explains why he committed the crimes that he did. That explains why everything in his life and his marriage was an act. Him recovering their bodies or transporting their bodies just shows that he was a narcissist. Him not wanting to be in the Facebook videos, it's just part of him being a covert narcissist. I don't know, when you look at the Facebook videos, you see a lot of genuine moments with the family. A lot of them are contrived, of course, but a lot of them are also genuine, and you see far more of Chris Watts playing with his children, down on the carpet with his children, than you do of Shanann. With Shanann, when she's recording herself, she's giving them instruction. It's vision boards and part of, put this powder there, but when she's recording Chris Watts, he's actually playing either with the dog or with the children, and there's laughter, and there's delight, and there's some kind of spontaneous element which Shanann then robs by trying to monetize it, or trying to just, I don't know, what do you call it, when you try and turn a family moment into a social media episode. Whether it's Christmas or a birthday, everything has got to be converted to video. So what happens to those people when you are doing that? What happens to the people in that frame when you are turning every precious moment into some kind of spectacle for the outside world? And I can tell you now, I don't know if you know this, if you're someone who subscribes to that particular channel, I don't know if you know this, but it is a fact that heavy social media use turns us into less empathetic people. In other words, there's a relationship between heavy social media use and narcissism and sociopathy. Someone who is on their phone, constantly looking on their phone, isn't connected to the world around them, isn't connected to the human beings around them, isn't a human being. They're a machine. All they're doing are liking and swiping and sniping at one another. And in the real world, they are invisible entities. They are not human beings. They don't have humanity. They are little machine leprechauns hovering on their, sort of like connected by umbilical cord to their phones. Get away from it. Be a human being again. That's the lesson that you learn from this case. That's something Nicole Atkinson said, is if there's one lesson to learn, get away from your phone and look at what's going on in your marriage. Get away from your phone and look at yourself. Get away from your phone and know where you are in the world. And the tragedy of this is how, if anything, people have gotten more caught up in social media, in their phones, in this whole YouTube circus. That seems to be the lesson, is that people have just gotten more addicted and more stuck on social media. And you can imagine, if I want to sell more books, wouldn't my message be just to make you more and more addicted to whatever I'm selling? No, my message to you is get off your phone, get off these videos, stop being on the internet all the time, and have human relationships with human beings. Become a human being again. And I hold myself as an exhibit in this regard. I write true crime for a living. It's a full-time job. I dedicate myself to it fully, and it's really all-consuming, and it's not very healthy. And I've written 94 books. My goal is to reach 100 by June next year, just so that I can say, well, I've written 20 books in 5 years, as crazy as that sounds. 20 books a year for 5 years. But from there I really want to downscale, and that includes my videos, that includes everything. And I want to get back to being a human being myself. I'm setting something up, I'm building a property and all that kind of thing, but in the meantime I'm sort of also addressing all this stuff, right? And within addressing it, I'm saying, let's become better human beings. Let's be human beings to one another. But it starts by knowing your own humanity. It starts by acknowledging your own humanity. And it actually starts when we look at these cases, these criminals, by acknowledging their humanity. And acknowledging their humanity doesn't mean that you endorse what they did. It simply means that you are acknowledging their humanity, because they are human beings. They are human beings. And so I've got 2 points left to make before I sign off here. One of them I've already made, but I just want to reiterate, and that is, again, I appreciate the conversation. I think it's a meaningful dialogue to have. I appreciate somebody going out their way to address some of the things I've raised in an intelligent, informed, somewhat informed way. And I think it helps everybody if we can discuss this in a mature way and in a quite a sophisticated way, and that actually takes us forward. And if there are people that listen to this and don't agree, that's good, because now you've gotten closer to where you need to go. If there are people who've listened to this and your hearts and minds have changed somewhat, then that's also good. Hopefully you've thought about things in a different way, and hopefully you beyond the Chris Watts case, hopefully you something has sort of, I don't even want to use the word triggered, but something has activated in you that you can grow and germinate like a seed. You can develop yourself from a seedling into a tree, and just a part of yourself that you haven't acknowledged, whether it's your physical self or whether it's a dimension to yourself, whether it's just admitting that you made a mistake. A lot of us want to be perfectionists all the time, and as soon as we acknowledge that we made a mistake, everybody else can as well. As soon as you acknowledge that these murderers and criminals, as horrible and despicable as they are, there's a human side to them as well, then we can acknowledge the same about ourselves, that there's also some horrible sides to us, that there's also deceits in us, not always in somebody else who's the scapegoat, but that we can address those things in ourselves. And so my sort of final message is, to this YouTuber is, just be careful in prognosticating over criminals. I think, and I'm guessing, but I think this is the first time you've ever done it with the Chris Watts case. You just need to be a little bit careful, perhaps, in being too confident about psychology just automatically translating to criminal psychology. Perhaps if you study the Patrick Frazee case, you will see that there are aspects to Chris Watts that are totally not applicable, and that if you think Chris Watts is a narcissist, then look at Patrick Frazee. I've got a different word for him, and I don't think it's helpful either, but I would call him sadistic. And that in that way is totally different to Chris Watts. I've already studied the case in some detail, and I've already studied what people have said about him and what he says about himself and so on. And Frazee is a totally different animal to Chris Watts. And so just between these two examples, and I'm addressing the YouTuber directly here, just by these two examples you will get an idea that how different criminal psychology is, and how you can't even begin to start saying Chris Watts is a narcissist and so is Patrick Frazee. That is not addressing what, even close to addressing what has happened in either of these cases. All you are doing is you mudding the whole story. And that brings me to the absolutely last point that I want to make, and this addresses the people listening, the people who are kind of relying on either me or this other person to steer them in the right direction in terms of things like psychology. And my advice to you is make up your own mind. Think for yourself. Don't have YouTubers sort of make up your mind for you. Be influenced by them. Be inspired by them. I don't even want to say be guided by us, but be you can certainly take a leaf out of our books, but then think for yourself, apply it in your own, because that's something that is sorely missing in our society, is and that's part of being a human being, is where you as an organism think for yourself, where you say, I'm in this situation, I know it best, I'm gonna address it. And that comes from thinking for yourself. And so what I would like for you guys, a lot of people involved in true crime see themselves as victims, whether you like it or not, whether you acknowledge it or not. And I would like that to change. I would like you not to see yourself as a victim. I would like me not to see myself as a victim. One of the things that victims do, and I don't know whether this is a narcissistic trait, whether it's ordinary meat and potatoes scapegoating, which a lot of people do, politicians do it, criminals do it, everybody does it, but victims especially do it, is what victims gravitate towards is blaming someone else. You can only be a victim if you are blaming somebody else, and true crime is filled with that. True crime is filled with people saying, who is to blame, what is to blame, let's make a fortress of information based on who is to blame. And when do you step forward out of that morass, that quagmire, and say, I'm to blame for my circumstances, it's up to me to deliver myself from evil, I'm to blame for where I am, I'm to blame for X, Y, and Z. When do we step forward out of the whole muddle and take accountability? When do we stop pointing our fingers at these criminals and telling them and arguing about how they lie and all that? And when do we point that same finger at ourselves and say, stop lying, step forward, live, go and do something you want to do, go and enjoy, stop blaming someone else. Make yourself to blame for having a good life, make yourself to blame for things going well, make yourself to blame for your relationship going well, right? Make yourself to blame for getting a good job, make yourself to blame for that kind of thing, right? In true crime we talk about victim blaming, and what is that? It's where you're alive and you blame the victim for the fact that the victim has died. And we can see how one can't stomach that kind of thing, how unattractive and ugly that is. But consider the mirror psychology of that, of a victim who's alive, not dead, a victim who's alive, but who is blaming others all the time. And how do we blame others? We say, you have that disorder, you have that narcissism trait, you have that red flag and that red flag, and because of that I'm going to turn my back on you because I blame you for this pickle that we're in. There's the rub, it's because of you. I blame you for this and that and that, and I recognize that these are traits in you, and you to blame. I recognize that. And so my message to you is, be honest about your own victimhood. Be honest that when you're in true crime, it's a vehicle for you to explore your own victimhood. And what I'm saying is, stop doing that. What I'm saying is, recognize that you're a human being and that you are seeing yourself as a victim, and that you like seeing others as victims, and you like blaming. And I'm saying, stop doing that, interrogate that whole thing, and blame yourself, but in a positive way. Blame yourself for things going better in your life. Blame yourself, make yourself accountable for what's wrong and what's right. Stop making the focus on who is to blame, on others. Stop pointing the finger constantly to others on who is to blame. Start pointing the finger to yourself on what is wrong and what is right. What is wrong about me? What is right about me? And I can tell you, you're going to get a lot further if you start off with what's wrong about you in an honest way, not in a despairing way or in a negative way, but simply a fair assessment of you as a human being. What's wrong? And then taking that and saying, you know what, I'm not perfect. What's right about me? And then you take those things, and then from there you build a life worth having. Thank you for listening.